Welcome back to another episode of The Loco Fit Show, where we redefine what healthy means for you. I'm your host, Laurin, and this week I'm interviewing my friend, Adam Ibrahim. I said it right?
You did.
I almost messed it up. I got nervous. Game day nervousness. Anyways, my intros, as you guys know, if you're a listener of the podcast, are never great. So we've been friends for many years. Give a little background on yourself. And today we're actually going to dive into an interesting topic. So you were doing your PhD and I was, you were running the research study and we were talking about readiness and recovery. And I was like, we just need to do a podcast on this because this is a really interesting topic that I think a lot of people will get benefit from and just kind of change the way that they conceptualize this topic. So before we get into that, a little bit of your background.
Like Laurin said, I'm a PhD student at the University of Tennessee. Got to give a lot of props to Dr. Bill Campbell, who was my former mentor, Dr. Samuel Buckner, who was my former mentor, but now I work under Dr. Kelly Strohacker. So she's really the individual that started the readiness concept. She identified the gap within flexible nonlinear periodization, but she's more of the behavioral cycle aspect of just exercise adherence. And when I first met her, she talked to me and I was like, I really have no idea what you're talking about. So this is probably a sign that I need to come here and, get uncomfortable, learn a little bit outside of my research realm with physique enhancement, blood flow restriction and things of that nature. So I've done my master's at USF with Campbell, Buckner. But yeah, I've coached basketball for almost 6 years, middle school, high school. Was a former collegiate athlete myself at the Division II level. Competitive powerlifter, hold 3 state records, Tennessee, Florida, South Carolina. So I like to say
South Carolina.
It's like a 90-minute drive. So it was like, why not? Why not just go over there, break them, go back home to Tennessee? So yeah, it's been a fun journey. But again, I got to give a lot of shout out to like you, for example, Dr. Chris Guy, a lot of the people at evidence-based movement. So I've been impacted by a lot of people and been fortunate to be where I'm at today.
Oh, well, no, I'm super excited for what you're doing. And I love the idea of just kind of exercise adherence in general. This is a topic that I feel like, especially in the scientific realm, we're always talking about optimal. And this is something that I always I understand, but then it's like, okay, we have to get out of that realm and say, okay, what is optimal? But then also what is actually going to work? What are people actually going to do? What are these first steps? And like an optimal program means nothing if the client isn't going to be able to execute on it or the person, individual, whatever it is. So I love this topic and I don't think it's really discussed enough, especially in the world of the scientific literature, because it's not as
not sexy.
Yeah, it's not that exciting.
No, it's not.
It's really not. It's kind of like the weight regain stuff. I love all that. But who wants to study that? We want to study what are the next protocols that we can do? What are the next drugs? What are this? And all of those things are amazing. But that means nothing if someone can't keep off the weight that they've initially lost. But studying how to maintain something is pretty boring.
So I think the one thing that I've learned within being at University of Tennessee and Dr. Kelly Strohacker is, right, if you look at any exercise science literature, there's always nothing but positive outcomes coming out of it. So it's obvious exercise is good, but still people don't do it. And even the scientific literature, you only see positive hypotheses, only no null results, and those you still learn a lot of good things from those null findings. But the proof of concept worked, the exploratory work, which is what you kind of talked about of what I'm trying to do right now. She highlighted something called the orbit model, the things that we have to do a lot of refinement. We have to get things optimized rather than just throwing things in RCT after RCT, because again, we can get people in the lab, we can do all of these things, but in the real world, that is complex. As we know as coaches, people don't really do what they're supposed to be doing. So getting, again, people to adhere to it long term, taking what I always say is the small steps that, again, aren't sexy. They're not flashy. But you're able to do this when you're 50, 60, 70 because you've taken the time to refine and do all of the things that you should have done to get to where you need to be to sustain and maintain what you're trying to do.
So what is the orbit model?
So that I couldn't tell you the exact orbit or the acronym of it, but in a general sense, it's not just putting a trial together. And again, we're going to see the same thing again with autoregulation. That literature is it's my realm of research, And the gap is what readiness is. But autoregulation, again, we put people in.
Yeah, explain that from the beginning.
In what realm? Sorry, I'm going all over the place, it seems.
I know. Just start with what does autoregulation mean to you and your research?
Yeah, so my research realm is focusing on autoregulation rather than just in a performance enhancement realm of training or anything like that, but a way for us to utilize it to improve and optimize exercise adherence because it's flexible in nature, right? It's person adaptive, which a lot of the psychological individuals in research have now called for repeatedly. Because again, we can put people in a program, in a lab. They're going to see gains in strength. They're going to see gains in muscle mass. They're doing what they're supposed to be doing, right?
But put it in the room. 10-week study.
Yeah. So you're going to see all those optimizations, but what happens after? What was the experience of that program? And those are the questions that nobody has asked in periodization literature and autoregulation literature.
So when you mean autoregulation, like somebody who's able to now regulate themselves over the course of a long period of time? And how they're going to adjust what they're doing or what they're not doing. So
autoregulation, I think, as a formula is, right, your baseline fitness, your baseline fitness, your fatigue, your fitness, and your readiness. And what we highlight is the readiness, but we like to balance, specifically in the sports realm, is your fitness and fatigue. Readiness has been taken into concepts of it could just be your energy level, could be your motivation, could be just your personal preference of whatever you want to do on that specific day. But autoregulation, again, is this I can't state the exact definition off the top of my head, but it's just an adaptable framework to allow for you to have a positive experience with any form of exercise in that sense.
So what were you guys seeing that was maybe... What kind of kicked all this off with your research? Like, what was like the gap in this question that you were like, I'm really trying to figure out this? And obviously that changes over time as you're conducting the research. But when you went into this, like, what was your question? If you can share that.
No, yeah. So really the question is actually what readiness is. So when I first came to the University of Tennessee, I did a systematic review on so autoregulation, to even back up a little bit more. There's within session, which is your rate of perceived exertion, your velocity-based training or repetitions you're reserved, all of those, like I'm making adjustments within session. And if you want to study that, that's super complex because you're making all of these adjustments to those variables and things of that nature. But there's meta-session autoregulation, which is your flexible nonlinear periodization, heart rate variability, APRE, like all of these other, before the session even concludes or starts, you're dictating how you're going to perform the specific session. And what we've seen within autoregulation, it's either purely subjective or purely objective with heart rate variability. And we've continuously seen incongruences between objective and subjective forms of readiness, right? Heart rate variability is supposed to pick up on all of these environmental factors, your psychological, physiological status, but it doesn't always align that way, right? Your wearable could say one thing, but you can feel another thing. Mm-hmm. And what we've tried to do is take these readiness constructs that we've almost came up with as a lab through more of that exploratory work with post-session readiness recall, or it was just asking people literally, what do you need to do to feel ready? And this goes all the way back to Kramer and Fleck's 2007 FNLP textbook of, right, there's a 7-step checklist that you're going to be able to go through with an athlete or whomever to allow this adjustment or this adaptation, this autoregulation form to optimize the training session. So a lot of that was, we came up with this word, this term readiness. There's this 7-step checklist, but nobody's actually done the work to, does this actually work? At face value, it works. It makes a lot of sense, but we've never actually put it to the test. So now we're saying, all right, what is readiness? And we've gone into a whole mess of things almost, but that's science.
And you're opening up, okay, this is this first question, and then wherever this leads, obviously that's how the whole scientific process works, is like we learn this one piece and then we add that piece to like the larger puzzle, mm-hmm. and then that starts like 5 other kind of subtopics. We're hoping that it does, right?
Exactly.
But especially when there is so much lack of understanding, mm-hmm. right? Then I think there's so many kind of rabbit holes to go down. Yeah. So you did the systematic review when you got there, and then now you've been doing your own research. And where, what was kind of the reason for doing this? Like what gaps did you see that you're like, all right, after the systematic review, we know this, but we don't know that. Like, what were some of the big findings there that then contributed to you wanting to run this study?
Yeah, so there's pretty much two things. One, specifically being the systematic review, seeing that meta-session autoregulation was either subjective or objective. And we've seen these incongruencies in athletes, even in, clinical populations of, hey, I feel all of this pain. I feel like tachycardia, but you go to the doctor
pain
and they're like,
is so tough to study too. Oh my gosh.
Biopsychosocial model is insane. So yeah, a lot of these thoughts, feelings, objective, subjective markers or measurements, they don't always align. But another way we could utilize autoregulation, meta-session autoregulation, is a tool to teach and anchor the experience of exercise. But Dr. Strohacker, and then now currently Dr. Corey Beaumont, did a lot of work to understand what the constructs of readiness were. So there's 52 constructs that we have currently. They fall into like hunger, just energy levels, all of these other constructs that you would think of how I'm actually going to prepare for an exercise session. So we gave ecological momentary assessment. So pretty much people for 21 straight days would answer a survey on their phone and they would say, right now, how are you feeling? So we tried to build this readiness profile for them, and we were presenting this to them. But one of those things that continuously was a theme after we interviewed them of, hey, does this make sense? Would you actually utilize this? Was like, no, because my wearable says one thing and I feel another thing. So that's what's kind of got me into, right, if we're going to build something that is actually practical and people can utilize of readiness from these profiles, but the barrier is I don't trust it, or there's this incongruency between my wearable, and now I'm not going to even trust what you're trying to build because, again, I have these trust issues because something else is biasing my interpretation of what we're trying to present. So again, my findings in my systematic review being subjective versus objective. What we did subjective, we try to make an objective measure out of this readiness, but people were still not buying into it. So again, that's that proof of concept. If we're going to refine autoregulation to help exercise adherence, we need to hear from people like yourself, or people that continuously exercise, so we can refine this for the individuals that don't even do the thing.
Mm-hmm. Would you say, what were the most common devices? Obviously, I know for your research, you're using Aura and the Whoop Band, but for the systematic review, like, are those still like the two biggest readers? Like, I guess I don't know any other ones, to be honest, but I know that there are. I just can't think of the names. Who's that guy? He's a big strength coach. Joel somebody. I think he has one. But
Joel Seedman?
No. Anyways, but it's like a smaller like company, I'm sure. You know what I mean? But like, I don't know. So when you're doing the systematic review, like, what were some of the wearables people were using? So
all of any heart rate variability, objective meta-session autoregulation was all using a heart rate monitor. Nothing was actually utilizing a wearable. Why we're using the wearable is because specifically the Aura ring, right? It says, this is your readiness. Or the Whoop Band is, this is your recovery. And that's a whole other can of worms that in the literature, recovery, readiness, and resources are all used interchangeably. So there's, again, we're starting really, I don't want to say low, but there's a lot of optimization that we're allowed to go ahead and confront and see what we can actually utilize autoregulation for, rather than, hey, it's used for sports performance, to mitigate fitness and fatigue and allow for, improvement in performance. But we can also utilize this for the general population to have positive exercise experience and get them to actually adhere to exercise. It's not that rigid, hey, if I'm going to do this exercise, I have to adhere to this specific day, this specific plan. We can make these adjustments. Hey, if your readiness is low, whatever that means to you, you can be adaptive. You can do a lower intensity workout, lower the rate, reps, maybe even do a completely different session in that sense. But I'm not even sure where I was going with now.
That's so tough, though, because especially when somebody's first starting, because for a lot of people, they might be like, oh, like, well, everything, I'm really sore, this hurts, like, I probably shouldn't do anything, you know what I mean? And then like that, like the lack of previous consistency will make all of those training sessions harder. And then that could be like, oh, well, I'll just rest another day. And like, it's very, like, there's like that fine line of like, you are, I guess, maybe undershooting your actual readiness or recovery, right? And then it's like, so much of behavioral stuff is just actually setting a routine and being consistent. obviously then once you're able to refine that, it's then saying, okay, how am I feeling? I can regulate. Okay, well, Monday can actually be Tuesday. But like, how many times do we know people who are like, oh, well, Monday, then Tuesday, and then, oh, it's Friday and I haven't worked out. So, right. So it's like coming to that like middle ground of like, how do we have adherence and push through those like those hard days? And then also obviously on the whole other end of the spectrum is like the athlete who's like their legs falling off, like, oh, I'm fine, I can go train, right? Like there's both of those ends of the extreme. And that obviously makes this research even more challenging, because it's like, if you're studying everybody, then it's like, that's going to skew stuff a lot, right? Yeah.
So a lot of what Meta-session autoregulation has studied, or the population, is all trained individuals. But the thing is, the way they've operationalized readiness, again, is it purely objective, purely subjective? And you kind of said, right, if athletes feel this way and they're just at will being just able to self-select whatever session they want to do, how do we know that individuals had high readiness first off, and they actually, again, matched whatever workout that was supposed to be? So that's where, again, we need more information from the current studies. There's a lack of construct validity. There's just more information needed. And I think what you're saying is right. If somebody has that misalignment where maybe they have low readiness, or they have high readiness, let's say, but they continuously don't train the way they're supposed to, right? They don't challenge themselves enough. That's where, again, you can go to that journaling aspect of post-training and actually ask yourself, am I seeing the results? Did I push myself? Another way with FNLP specifically, what they've done is, right, you have an array of training sessions, right? So let's say high intensity, low intensity. But if you choose that low intensity day, well, now you cannot do that for the next 12 weeks.
Yeah.
As you continuously go throughout your program, you are now slimming down the exercise selection process. So there's ways around it. But I think, again, as a coach, having that conversation like, hey, we're flexible, but you have to understand that exercise is going to be a little uncomfortable. Our goal is to realign based on how you are specifically feeling. But there's going to be times where it's like, we need to go ahead and just push through whatever we're kind of feeling in that sense.
Yeah, it's so tough. And, if somebody is working with a coach, obviously it's a little bit easier because you can have that detached person who can, your accountability, like as a coach, you're giving accountability, but you're also being that detached perspective to be like, hey, like, you can step it up, or like, no, like there was a lot going on, maybe take a deload this week, or take a day off, whatever it is. Like you're able to see that a lot easier. But for a lot of people who are doing this on their own, obviously that's really where the challenge is, especially if they are a beginner and they're doing this on their own. That is where I think there's so much that is like that, like you said, like that fine line. But I do like that model of like, okay, if you choose this, then that means you get this, or if you choose this now, then you don't get this later. And it's kind of this idea of like, I guess, postponing. I don't even want to call it gratification, but it's an easy way for me to conceptualize it. But yeah, that's so. The adherence is everything, right? Whether it's training or diet or cardio or behaviors, like literally everything comes down to the adherence of it. Like there's so many great things that you can do, but then I think that's where people get really tripped up, is like, how do I actually make this sustainable? And that's like the boring stuff, but that really is everything. So what are the main questions that you're asking from your research? I know you can't share that obviously yet, like any of the results, because at this point you still haven't even gone through all that, but what were the main things that you're going through?
Well, I will say with the current project that I'm doing right now is getting into, if you have these incongruencies, why do you believe these incongruencies are happening from your wearable, right? What it's telling you your readiness is at versus what you actually are feeling. And, going through it now, probably didn't pick like the best training population, because I think, again, you guys know what you're feeling. You guys almost have this buy-in, but in the sense that I'm hearing a lot of also great information of what you guys think readiness and recovery is. And it aligns a lot with what we've already found with untrained and like obese sedentary females. So the crosstalk between, again, we are starting to understand more and more what readiness actually is. But again, the wearable is just a tool. Like you said it, and multiple people have said it. It's allowed me to take the ego out and actually be okay with toning it down a little bit. Because, as you said before, to utilize autoregulation appropriately, you need to be accepting of today's not the day. And because it's not the day, I need to make an adjustment. Or if today is the day, like I'm feeling really good, go ahead and bump everything up. And that goes back to what like self-determination theory of like, I'm giving you autonomous support. I'm allowing you to make the adjustments based on how you feel, right? Giving you that control of, because I'm feeling X, Y, Z, I'm able to make these adjustments, and being able to reflect on it positively through a journaling or whatever the case may be, saying, hey, I made this adjustment. How did I feel after? Like that exercise experience is crucial for that adherence aspect, right? I think a lot of people will say, if I made the adjustment, at first I didn't enjoy it because I felt like I was letting myself down. I felt like I could do more. And that's that athlete's mentality I think a lot of us have. Like, if I'm doing less, I'm a failure. Like, again, exercise is supposed to be hard. Go hard or go home. But it's that short term of sacrificing a little bit, you're able to kind of bounce back through another session, or again, optimally perform another day or another week throughout. And that's the whole thing of autoregulation. If you can take into account your readiness, you're able to finally tune your fitness and fatigue, because the ultimate goal is for you to express your fitness throughout the rest of your program, or I will say throughout the rest of your life. You're going to have fatigue accumulate in a sense, but if we're able to adjust appropriately based on our readiness, again, hopefully fatigue will be able to be mitigated as quickly or as fast as possible. So you can express your fitness. You can continuously adhere to the exercise because the experience is positive.
Yeah, and it's thinking in terms of like, okay, what's going to happen the next few weeks or what's going to happen the next few years. And that's so hard for us to see sometimes, like, especially like when there's a lot of other factors going on, you know what I mean? It's never usually like just that one thing. There's always like everything's like toppling down that week. And then you're like, oh, well, I'm this huge failure with my training or whatever. And I was even having a conversation with a client the other day, and she was like, oh, I'm still really struggling with, you know, this aspect. And I was like, it's okay. Like, nobody said you needed to add 50 pounds to your squat. You know what I mean? Like, maybe you could do that for a session or two or a few and then be completely beat up, probably injure yourself. And then in 6 months, we're no farther ahead. You know, I'd much rather you slowly be able to make progression. Now, not saying that if you slowly improve, you're going to be able to add weight every week. Like, of course not. Did any of your coaches ever say that growing up? Like, oh yeah. Oh, if you add 5 pounds each week, like, think about what you'll be doing at the end of the semester. It's like, I would have been squatting 2,000 pounds at this point. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, I mean, I understand the concept, but they were trying to, again, have that kind of like delayed gratification mindset. So like, I get it. But it was like close, but not there yet. But not there. But not quite. But yeah, like the idea of, okay, what's going to happen in this session or the next few sessions versus where is this going to put me in the long term? And, you know, sometimes we do have to make short-term sacrifices. You know, if you are an athlete competing in something, that is a very different story. You know, we talked about this on our interview. Like, when I was competing as a physique athlete, like, there's a certain point in prep where every day you wake up and it's like, no day is my day at this point. You know what I mean? But I'm going to make it my day because there is no other option, right? And that's a very specific goal for a very specific day. And that's completely different. And performance is likely going to suffer as you are losing body fat and you are in a severe restriction. That's just kind of the name of the game. If you are competing in a strength sport where you're trying to hit certain numbers, there's going to be like, hey, you got to make some short-term sacrifices and feel really, really fatigued in order to kind of get over this and get stronger. But that's still within a cycle of looking at the big picture. You know what I mean? Like, you can only do that a few times until then your body is like, no. Yeah. So there's going to be different times, but in general, outside of those very, very specific situations, I think that this concept of being able to regulate yourself, like we talk about this all the time on the show with regulating your food, like, right? Like, the actual key to sustainable diet is moderating yourself and having the ability to do that in any situation. And that is absolutely the hardest thing for people to grasp, but that is like the crux. If you can moderate your food intake and say yes to certain things and say no to other things and moderate how much you're eating, you will be able to maintain any physique that you want. But that is so hard because of those psychosocial factors and everything else. You know what I mean? So I'm not saying it's easy. I'm just saying, like, that is the crux of it. But the same thing with training. If you're able to moderate yourself during the session and afterwards, like, that is what is going to be able to get you the results, not just for that 8 weeks or those 12 weeks. It's afterwards. Like, that's what it always blows my mind, that the studies where they do some crazy stuff for 8 or 10 weeks, you know what I mean? And it's like these crazy volume studies. And that's always like, okay, cool. Like, cool story, bro. You know, like, we did all this volume and we saw results. Like, I'd fucking hope so, right? Yeah. Like, I would hope so. But what are those people doing afterwards? It's just like the crazy diet studies. Okay, now we're on this, you know, the very low calorie diets, which are in literature typically less than 800 calories for people who are, generally speaking, overweight and obese. So they're going to be at a very high body weight for that low amount of calories. Okay, cool. They lost weight. What happens afterwards? I want to see the follow-up 6 months, right? So it's like one of those things that it's like science gets so focused on just this, which is understandable because of the design and the nature of it. But it is frustrating because, again, people are looking for that grant money. People are looking for certain notoriety. Oh, I want to publish this research with these crazy results. And then it's like, okay, well, then where does that land actually everybody? Like, is this actually serving people? Is it actually, again, in my eyes, what the orbit model tries to do is try to move the field in the appropriate direction. And it's very collaborative in nature. Prime example is we work with, Dr. Richard Keegan, who is in Australia, who made the ARM scale, which is a readiness scale for the Army. My mentor, Dr. Kelly Stracker, could have easily started picking it apart and be like, no, this is what readiness actually is. But instead, we've actually started to collaborate with him. And we're refining his specific scale, but we're trying to refine it for exercise. Because right now, we literally just have a long list of what people are reporting. And hey, go ahead and let me know what's most important for you for readiness. And to kind of go back to your point of, there's these specific points where, like, I may not feel ready, but it's that motivation or that, again, that specific time frame. Dr. John Kiley says a lot about this. It's like, sure, you might not feel ready, but it's a World Cup game. Put your feelings aside and it's time for you to perform. So this is where readiness, it's not just going to be, you tell me readiness feels like this right now, but readiness for you 10 years from now could be totally different. Kind of how you've evolved as a physique competitor into now just focusing on general health. I'm sure your readiness measures or constructs would have been very different for you while you're a physique competitor and what it is now. That's the thing, is readiness is evolving even during the session, throughout your whole time of being an exerciser. And I think that's the premise. If you're able to self-regulate and auto-regulate yourself and be in tune with your body, you should be able to do this complex health behavior for the rest of your life. And that's the unfortunate thing about exercise. You have to do it for the rest of your life if you want to go ahead and see these benefits. Not a lot of people see like these 90-day challenges or 75-day challenge or anything like that. It's a great jumpstart, but what did you actually get from it? What was the experience in the 8 to 12 week study the first study that pops into my head that was grueling was the Cody Hans study. It was like, they worked up to like 20 sets of squats in one session. And I'm like, how did me with that?
why did I get questions on my IRB for just asking people simple questions about what readiness is? But he can almost literally murder somebody with squats.
How
but
old
it goes
was
to
the study?
It was, I think it was 12 weeks. But my point is
oh my God,
people can do these things, but how do they feel after? I bet you that person or those subjects probably haven't squatted in quite a long time, right? Because they have
never squatting again.
Yeah, they have this negative association with, if I squat, I'm going to feel soreness or whatever the case may be. And that is the other theory. Like we talked about the art of PI, affective reflective theory of physical inactivity and exercise, where it's this dual mode model, right? You've heard that type 1 and type 2 processes, thinking fast and slow.
I don't know.
So
as I'm thinking really slow about it.
So when I first say anything exercise related, there's an immediate process that people have of like, oh my God, exercise is great or exercise is bad. And that deliberate, that fast, immediate process is really what's going to dictate, am I going to go ahead and perform exercise or not? And that's really dictated on your continuous exposure and experience of exercise. So going back to autoregulation, if we can modify the intensity and actually allow somebody to have a positive experience, hedonic theory, right? People seek pleasure. If we're able to have this as a pleasure experience, I'm going to want to go ahead and continuously do this exercise. Sure, I might not see the results, but at least I'm not doing a HIIT session where I'm like feeling gassed. I'm feeling like, again, I just want to throw up and hurdle. Like affect, the way we feel within session, steadily decreases once we've crossed that lactate threshold. And we don't know too much about resistance training. Lo and behold, with exercise science, we don't know much about resistance training. But with aerobic training, once you, yeah, a big pet peeve, especially at the University of Tennessee. But once you cross this threshold, immediately you start to have all these negative thoughts and feelings. But if we can kind of mitigate and modify the intensity or whatever the workload selection can be, again, the experience of exercise should be more positive. You should learn. Right, William Grazione says you kind of mentioned a little bit of being an educated dieter, right? If we can make people educated exercisers, like they're able to, again, auto-regulate or self-modify whatever variable they need to modify, again, the adherence to exercise should, in theory, be better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think over time, too, the tag, I guess, that you put on, I'm trying to conceptualize the right word, but like the word or the emotion that you put around it is very different, right? So like when, you're talking about like let's say like a challenge, right? Or something, any kind of program that's going to get people started, right? Like obviously it's going to probably be like unenjoyable in the beginning, right? But they're going to stick to it because they have these set parameters. I'm like, all right, I need to hit this because of whatever. So someone says it or I'm holding myself accountable. But over time, the more that you do it, you realize like, okay, actually, when I do this, maybe I am feeling better. Or when I hold myself accountable, I feel better, right? Like, so that tag now is like a positive emotion. Like when I do this, I feel this way. Or maybe I still don't even feel great doing this, but that affects everything else. Like I still don't maybe love training, but when I train, I sleep better, right? Like there's like these other effects. So you start to kind of change that like tag of how you feel about it. I'm trying to think of a better word than tag, but like, right? Like
association, I feel, yeah.
Wow. The association, like sick. My vocabulary is awesome. But your association is now going to change with it because of all of the other kind of downstream effects, which was one of the most amazing things about exercise, in my opinion, is that there's so many like peripheral effects, right? Like whether it's like sleep, mood, energy, digestion, like all these things. Obviously, you're going to physically look different as well, depending on the type of training that you're doing. But like how you're feeling is going to be even quicker, I would say, right? Like within a week, you will notice those differences. You might not have a different physique. You might not run faster, you know what I mean? Or lift more weights, but you're probably going to be like, wow, my digestion is better and my sleep and my mood. And like when I train at this time, my energy, but all of that takes time and reflection. So I do think that at some point there has to be that, like, how do we get people, like, how do we bridge that gap of like, okay, the beginning is going to be really challenging for most people. So we need to have a way for them to actually stick it through, even if they don't like it, but then associate it more positively. So then they're able to adhere to it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think even if, where you say like the beginning is going to be hard, I think the beginning of any new behavior is going to be hard, but still realigning with a low intensity bout of, hey, like James Clear says it, where he talked about an individual story of losing 100 pounds and keeping it off. When he first started, he literally would just go to the gym for 5 minutes and walk in, but it was instilling that behavior of getting into the gym and doing those things. So again, being flexible, being adaptive with your exercise program, and not what I continue to see as a coach and even with research is like, no, we're coming in 3 sets of 10. We're just going to continuously, progressively over 5 pounds, more reps, more sets, anything like that. But in my eyes, more important is like just doing the damn thing is really impressive, especially when it comes to exercise, when it doesn't always feel good. And taking note of all of those other subjective or behavioral aspects that you are also reaping from exercise. Because we can tell, and people know all of these things, but yet they're not adhering to this behavior.
I think too, the reflective part is like everything, right? Like that is the piece that I think a lot of people don't think about in terms of exercise, right? Like now with the way that people are conceptualizing mental health, like a lot more people are being reflective about maybe their mindset or the way that they have conversations or confrontations or whatever, right? Like that is very normal when we're talking about like, hey, when we're working on our mental health, like we're maybe going to journal or go to a therapy session or talk with someone or just reflect in general on these things. The conversation about reflecting on exercise is not really a conversation that I think is had. And I don't think I ever had like distinctly tried to have that conversation with myself. I think over time it developed because I developed an intuitive sense because I've done it for so long. But I think that if we can start that process earlier, the same thing with diet, like, when people are struggling with their diet, okay, like it's not just, there's a lot of reasons why. So we need to be able to reflect on, because I could say 15 reasons, but you might come up with a 16th one that's different and unique for you. But that only came through reflection. So I think the idea of like having those introspective thoughts is very normal for mental health, but is not discussed at all in the realm of like physical health. And I would say that's, exercise and diet and all those behaviors. And it's definitely, I think, I don't see any downsides to it. You know what I mean? Like I literally don't see any downsides for people to actually start to be more reflective on their training. And this doesn't mean you have to write a thesis on like how you're feeling every day, but it could just be a few notes that you're jotting down. And this goes for anything. When someone's dealing, when a client's dealing with digestive issues, what's the first thing? All right, well, let's start to maybe pinpoint some foods. Or was it a certain, at a certain time during the day? Or was it at a certain point in the week? Or was it after, this really stressful meeting? Every Thursday you have this meeting, and then, Friday, completely shocked. Like, how do we realize those things? Through journaling and introspection. So we always do that with those types of things, but with exercise, I think that is just not even a conversation. And I think that would really be like honestly, one of the biggest things that we could get people to start adhering more.
And I think it's self-monitoring any behavior or outcome that you're trying to strive for. It's like, how am I getting there? What did it feel like when I got there? And this is where we talk a little bit about exercise science research being very quantitative focus. And the research I'm doing right now is very qualitative focus. But I'm trying to, and there's mixed methods research. And it's what we do as coaches. We have all of this objective information, repetitions, whatever the case may be. And then we have them fill out this subjective form of, okay, tell me actually how things went. I think that's what needs to happen in the exercise science literature. Is like, tell me this big story. Sure, again, like I'll go back to the blood flow restriction study I did with my calves with Dr. Buckner. Did that for, I think it was 8 weeks. I haven't trained calves since because it's been, one, because we didn't grow. 2, because it was awful.
That's not what I expected you to say at all. I thought you were going to be like, that's when I started journaling about my...
Oh, no. Well, if I can reflect back, like again, affective, reflective, like reflecting on that experience...
fuck calf training, seriously.
I spent 30 minutes 3 times a week to train my calves that didn't even grow. And it was painful. It was excruciating. But thinking about how, again, we can reflect and hold ourselves accountable to, hey, I made this adjustment. Was it the correct one? If it wasn't, what can I do next? And so, again, when you're exposed to another situation or a circumstance, again, with exercise, you should be doing it repeatedly. You can make the appropriate adjustment. Again, it's a learning aspect. You were able to make these adjustments throughout your time because you've done it for a long time. A lot of us are forced to make these, whether it be an injury or just a whole like life shift. But if we can avoid that chronic injury or anything like that, now it's like, right, I don't have to have this kinesiophobia of deadlifts are terrible or anything like that. And there's so many things that go into exercise that we miss with just focusing on objective measures.
Oh, like again, like going back to kind of like the psych world, like that's so subjective based, and then there's not enough objective stuff. And then with the, the exercise science world or the, diet research world, it's all objective and not subjective. Like, and it's like, why can't we bridge that? Like we are doing that on a day-to-day basis as coaches. And that's how we're finding out these things. And that's why there's a lot of people who are in the industry who are like, well, who needed a research study for that? Like we figured that out 10 years ago, and it's like, yes, we did. But the whole point, the idea of science is to be able to move things forward faster. You know what I mean? So it's like, so we can avoid, and that's our goal as coaches and your goal as a researcher is, okay, how can we get people to avoid, we did this for 10 years before we realized it. Like you do something long enough, you're going to figure it out. But hey, maybe we could shorten that time course to 6 months for someone, and maybe we can't. Maybe the answer is you can't do that. Maybe the answer is it does take that long. Like, I don't know. There obviously has to be a time component. Nobody's going to be able to bypass certain things in terms of like having a really deep understanding of it. Like there's just literally no way. And obviously some people are going to pick things up faster than others, but there absolutely is a way to shorten that time course. And that is where research and application from coaches and educators in the space talking about this absolutely needs to happen. And I think that there's too much of there's too much of it, and there's too much like this group is right, this group is wrong, and like these camps, like the whole like scientists are in their ivory tower and they don't know anything about the world, and then there's like the on the ground people, but like the scientists are like, oh, they're just dumb meatheads, and it's like there's obviously both of those, but there's a lot larger group of people who are kind of in that middle group, and we can all, to your point, work together.
Yeah.
That's always just blows my mind about the industry, and like when we all start arguing about things, and like when you're newer to something, you really get like passionate about your beliefs, even if you don't really understand it. And you're maybe say things that you shouldn't, but the more that I do this, the more that I'm like, almost everything works. Like literally almost everything works if someone can adhere to it and it works for their life circumstances. And being able to flow in and out of different types of programs and things for people and your clients is coaching. Like, I don't care if someone now I have some clients who are keto, some clients who fast, some clients who have high carbs, some clients who have low protein, high protein, plant-based. I mean, they're all different things. Whatever works for you. You know what I mean? And again, there's like, yes, there is optimal, right? If somebody's like, what's the most optimal plan for this specific goal? I could lay that out, but if that person's not going to be able to do that for more than 3 weeks, then like, what the fuck is the point of the optimal plan? When instead, if we did something that's like 80% optimal and they're actually going to be able to do it for, like you said, the rest of your life, like eating healthy and training hard are constituents of being a healthy person who's aging, and all the benefits that we hear about are because they're compounded over time. So like, how are we going to actually be able to get someone to do this and not just consistently fall off, and just yo-yo through everything? And that's really like, if someone's like, what do you want to do? And like, that's it. That's what I want to be able to figure out. And as a coach, and be able to help educate people on that, because everything comes back to that. Like, everything comes back to like, you do something really hard for a little while and then you fall back off, and you do something hard and you fall off, and you go through this yo-yo cycle, and you look up in 5 years and you're in a worse spot. It's like, what's the point of that? Yeah.
And I think, having a pragmatic hat as a researcher and seeing, again, the quality of my work is actually impactful for the individual like yourself, or personal trainers, coaches. And it's going to take time, like the whole process of, right? I think it's the system at the end of the day where we are tenured based on how many publications, how many grant dollars we get, and not so much about the impact on the field or just the space. And I think that's one of my biggest pet peeves and eye openings. That's how great my mentor is. She's like, hey, take your time. Like, let's get some quality work in, rather than just pump out research article after research article that doesn't do anything. And that's what the whole Orbit model would say, is like, start off with a review and then continuously do this proof of concept work. And then before you even start an RCT, it's like, do a case study and then do a small case design. It's literally this iterative process that we don't want to waste all this money and time with something that we think we think should work. Again, exercise is going to work in an 8 to 12 week period in a lab. How can we do this in, again, real life conditions? And we have a lot of the tools to do that, like EMA, where we can literally just shoot people a text and, hey, tell me what you're doing, or here's a program, tell me how that felt. So there's a lot of optimization or opportunity for exercise science to take advantage of the technology that is happening within the research, but it's going to take time. And more importantly, we need to start being collaborative, because again, like the 3 words, readiness, resources, and recovery, they're interchangeable within the literature right now. And that's one of my biggest pieces, right? If you're going to define, or if you're going to have a construct, we need to be able to clearly define it, so we can, again, specifically attack what this is happening. So again, we're pushing the field in the right direction. Rather, now we have to, have these arguments of what is this, or how can we actually define it? But I think I'll stop that tangent now.
No, I think that's part of the problem with the grants and the way that everything is set up in academia. And people always, like you said, searching for those positive findings or those big findings. Like, you're going to self-select research designs that are going to like fulfill that, right? And anybody who thinks that scientists don't have bias is completely wrong. I mean, you would like to imagine that nobody does, and a lot of people don't, right? Like, I'm not trying to sit here and be one of these like scientist bashers. Like, clearly I'm far from that. But I do think that there is a lot more that we can, like, a collaborative process, and I think there is a really big, probably benefit that you are a coach and you've been an athlete. Like, I think that really has probably helped you with, making these, this design and just kind of how you view research in general, right? Like, I think that that's a huge piece of it. Instead of just being someone like, oh, let me put out some papers and like hope that they do well, like you have a completely different lens. And I think that that is a really, really big deal.
No, yeah, I think being able to, I always say walk the walk, but also talk the talk of I'm able to be a practitioner. Like if there's 3 things that I hope to continuously do is, train, coach, and research. If I'm able to do that for the rest of my life, I know I'm going to hopefully have an impact on this field that hopefully will transpire for generations and generations, teaching kids in the classroom, giving talks at conferences, anything like that. That's the ultimate goal. But I think right now, from what I know, we definitely need to take a step back, and it's not about just running RCT after RCT. So randomized controlled trial, just putting people into 2 different groups and again, telling them to exercise. We're going to see outcomes. That's why till this day, there's still a debate of which periodization method is better, or now what autoregulation method is better. It's like, that defeats the purpose. If we can't get people to do exercise, why are we arguing about this?
Yes.
So that's why I think, again, taking a step back, learning, qualitative, and not, qualitative is all these touchy-feelies and stuff that I don't care about. It's like, well, there's been this huge shift since, I think, COVID or whatever the case may be, where we need to actually make sure our mental health is good. We need to actually make sure that what we are doing is having a positive impact on our physical, mental, spiritual health, whatever the case may be. But yet we haven't actually, take that formative action in research. But I think we're starting to make these jumps or these steps to the appropriate way to refine some sort of package that allows individuals to be adherent to exercise. And my bias is let's use autoregulation for that, because they do it in sports performance to achieve optimal performance. But if we can achieve an optimal experience, performance would be that. I have a saying to all of my clients, chase the behavior, not the outcome, because if you do the behavior, that outcome is eventually going to be there. And that just usually clicks for a lot of people. It's like, don't worry about that objective stuff. Focus on your thoughts, your feelings, and literally learn the skills to allow yourself to be an educated dieter or an educated exercise. Because if you have that, you don't need me. And that's the end of the goal of like, you don't need anyone to really tell you what to do. And being able to do that, again, you're competent. Now you're, again, autonomous. You are feeling those human innate needs that, again, in theory, should allow you to be intrinsically motivated to just do the thing no matter how ready you are.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So if you could leave people with one, I guess, piece of advice, one earth-shattering piece of advice on readiness. No, there's so many great gems in here, but like one thing to kind of summarize this, or just in general from all of your findings so far that you would like to leave people with that maybe isn't as, I don't know, commonly known.
Yeah. I think the thing that I've learned from getting into this research space is be okay with just, again, literally just doing exercise. And it doesn't need to be the hardest thing. It should add to your life. It shouldn't take away. Where I said it shouldn't be a burden to do this thing. This literally should be exciting, motivating. Like I always think of whenever I go to a new gym and I'm just excited to just try all the new equipment or some equipment that I've never done before, keep that within your life, right? It doesn't need to be a job. It doesn't need to be a burden. And utilize literally how you feel and reflect on that. Like, okay, I made this adjustment. What did I adjust? And when I made this adjustment, I felt this literally right after. How'd you feel the morning of? Literally do these reflective processes literally on a routine basis like you would do exercise, so you can actually learn and become that educated exerciser. It is okay to tone it down so you can feel better the next day or the next week, the next month. Because if you're able to continuously mitigate or reduce the fatigue or the stress from exercise, you should hopefully long-term feel better, perform better. If you're feeling better and performing better, all of those goals that you have should be able to be maintainable and sustainable.
Absolutely. I love that so much. And if there's one thing that I've learned in the past year, just reflective practices in general are so powerful in really every aspect. So this doesn't need to be something that takes you 30 minutes to do. It could be a simple kind of just check, just how are you feeling? And doing that on a consistent basis is really going to be what allows you to do the things that you love and feel really good about them for a long time. So where can people find you? Or I guess more importantly, where can people find is a systematic review published?
It's been in review for quite a long time. Welcome to academia.
It is a process. Also, that's the other thing. People are like, well, why is science so slow? You guys have no idea. And I only got a slight taste of it, and that was enough for me. Like, it is the slowest process.
You talk about delayed gratification and patience. Academia is where you will learn that either the hard way or the easy way, depending on your personality.
Yes. So, okay, that's not out yet, but is there anywhere that people can follow you if you even want them to?
Yeah, I mean, I'm on Instagram at the Coach AI, pretty much on all social media platforms, but Instagram is my main platform. ResearchGate, just Adam Ibrahim. But if anyone has questions, they can literally shoot me an email I'll just do the Provozique email, but adam@provozique.com. Can send you all the articles, but first off, I always got to say shout out to you for having me on, and all of my other mentors, Dr. Campbell, Dr. Buckner, Chris Guy, all of those other individuals that have really shaped me and allowed me to be in the seat right now.
Yeah, well, this was an amazing interview. Thank you for coming on. So if you guys have any other questions for us, you can visit teamlocofit.com for coaching and other resources. And if you're interested in our app, which has macros, meal plans, training programs, all of that great stuff, you can visit redefinehealthyapp.com. I almost said the wrong damn URL. All right. Thank you guys so much for listening. Share the show if you enjoyed it, and we'll talk to you next week.